Again, they didn't have a whole lot. They were pretty poor, and they certainly didn't have a lot of money for clothing. In fact, this young girl turned out what she wore were dresses made up of potato sacks. And again, you're not going to be the coolest kid if you're wearing potato sacks to play with your friends. And in fact, she was bullied. She was bullied by her friends, and she was called the sack girl. So again, not off to a great start. As she lived her life, she was actually, this is going to get dark for some of you, she was molested by her cousin and her other relatives. And it didn't go so well, right? In fact, things went even worse. She got pregnant at the age of 14, went into a juvenile center and gave birth to a premature baby, which died thereafter. So really, really depressing stuff here. It really wasn't until high school when things turned around a little bit. You know, she actually took interest in the books, in the studying and education. I promise you this has nothing to do with the education work, our startup's doing, but nevertheless, things turn around. And if you heard this story before of this young girl, born in rural Mississippi, grew up in a very dire financial situation that really turned her life around, you probably know her as Oprah, right? I don't know if this is a shock to all of you. She talked about it a little bit, but really from day to day, you don't hear her say this, right? What you see is really that final image. It's the Oprah as a brand. It's Oprah as the queen of media, right? And this is what you see at the end of the day. She has millions upon millions of viewers and networks, right? She has her own network, she has her own brand. And it makes me think that all of this, by the way, behind all her shining success, there's this story of immense struggle and pain, right? Something that, if you hadn't heard the story before, you're going, well, why haven't I heard that before? It's because, well, we take a lot of success, other people's success, especially at face value, very much so. And we tend to compare it to ourselves, right? So you're taking somebody else's outside and comparing it inside. First of all, that's not so healthy, so to speak. But worse yet, in startups, we do this, by the way, way more often than any other industries, right? You talk about, say, the latest funding round, right? The latest user number growth, right? And while that's so great, and you should definitely announce those numbers, you look at your friends, you're saying, wow, they're doing so good. What am I doing over here, What's happening to my numbers? And sometimes you can go into a spiral of depression. You really figure out what is, needed for you, right? This is really what we're demanded for. I mean, I know this is almost like a joke now, but 15% month over month revenue growth in a hockey stick line, right? And by the way, if you actually achieve this or more, unicorn status, right? So really this is what's asked of us, right? All of the founders in the audience, all of the entrepreneurs, the struggle, right? And guess what? Well, it turns out, society glorifies success and dismisses failures. And they do this on a very grand scale. This is exactly the reason why, by the way, we talk about our successes. When's the last time you heard a talk about, oh, gee, that failed? Or what didn't work at our startup, right? Those are the things I love to hear. And those are the things we ought to be talking about. And when it comes to CEOs, I don't know if you ever encounter this. You ask, maybe your distant friend, acquaintance, hey, how are things going? Oh, well, it's smashing. It's going great. We just did X, That's actually not really helpful. Yeah, I don't know if you ever think about that, but something for you to think about is start to ask yourselves, who are those peers that you really trust? Because those are the people that you can truly ask and say, well, I'm not sure if this thing could be successful. Perhaps, is there this particular part? What are your thoughts on it? Because I want to have real feedback. And yes, you can't ask everybody. You can't put out a press release saying that. But at the very least, I'll tell you, we've had amazing funders, we've had amazing backers, amazing group of employees, who've given me advice personally. But I'll tell you, there's one group of people, and it's the peers, my peers, the CEOs of these companies that are maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead of me, that have probably given me the most advice. And for that, I certainly thank them, thank my peers. And by the way, you'll hear next from Caitlin, by the way, who's from Plum, and she's also been putting together a really valuable CEO network, right? Again, people of just several of you. We're not talking about a whole room like this. We're talking about 3 or 4 people going out, maybe to brunch or something, and really talking about those nitty-gritty issues. Because as much as I love the startup ecosystem and the culture, at the end of the day, what I love from all of you and all of this community is if we can be real, certainly more, at least within our peer, I think we can all win together, right? And the success will translate, and you're going to see that multiply. So at the end of the day, think about that, think about your peers, and if you don't have that, certainly, this is a great place to start. There's a lot of people here, as Alex said, and hopefully you'll find those people yourselves. My email is william@chalk.com. I can't unfortunately stick around too much, but happy to take a couple questions certainly now.
I find failure so much more stigmatized by the startup culture, and many successful entrepreneurs have had failure, and I've tried to get them on stage. Why do you think it's such a taboo subject in our community?
I think at the end of it is human psychology. Certainly if we can make it cool, Alex, if that's something you can do, make it sexy. I mean, hey, I have one of the community member talk about, what quite didn't work, because I'll be honest, if there's one thing at Chalk, if there's something we've ingrained in our culture is, well, what is the actual learning outcome of that, right? I mean, in education, we talk about that a lot. But really, it doesn't matter if it's success or failure. Have we learned something out of that? And if we can demonstrate that, I think the rest will gain. So you're absolutely right, and hopefully you can do something about it. It really resonates because I don't know if anybody's interested in, again, psychology. I've actually looked into this just because I had the exact same question. I'm like, why don't people talk about, what really didn't work, right? At least, to the greater sort of community. It turns out, by the way, just as Chance mentioned, one of the best ways to actually connect with somebody is to display vulnerability. I don't know if you've heard of that, right? It's essentially a way to actually show where your weaknesses are. And by the way, that beyond anything can bond you and the other person. So maybe that's why these peer networks work, when we actually start sharing these stories rather than just saying, hey, I did this new funding round, grew our user base this much, everything's going fantastic, I really don't have anything to talk about.